Hello and welcome back to our class on empirical banking and finance, and we now want to talk a little bit about a paper's unique selling proposition or unique selling propositions. Ideally, even if you're writing a term paper, if you're writing a bachelor thesis or master thesis, your paper, just like a research paper, should have one unique selling proposition. I've already talked about the fact that you should be using and should be dealing with just one research question in one paper. So don't overload your paper, even your term paper. And it's not just about one research question, but actually every paper has at least, and usually only one, unique selling proposition. Something that makes the paper very special in comparison to the related literature, to everything that has been done already. So this is the small golden nugget you can find in almost all research papers, and this should be also your aim and your goal in writing a term paper or writing a bachelor or master thesis. So research papers are usually not that different from term papers. The difference is that you should have one unique selling proposition, but researchers spend much more time on polishing their paper, going through the paper sentence by sentence, making sure that every sentence is polished, that every sentence is clear, and that the structure of the paper is near perfect. So that's the main difference. Obviously, a little bit more sophistication when it comes to methodology, but it's polishing, spending much more time on your paper. But that also means that even in a term paper, you can try to have a unique selling proposition. So my hint is, do not spend your time on a clever research question only, but also try to think about potential unique selling propositions. What could be done? What could be used? What kind of data can be used to make your paper, your term paper special, even if it's a term paper in which you only hypothesize about what could be done? You can already include some clever ideas. So what could some clever ideas be? The easiest way probably is to use a new data set. If you think of a data sample that is new, that could be considered fancy, this could be your unique selling proposition. It could be a new research method, or it could obviously be a completely new question, or answering a question from a completely new angle. It could be a new problem or a new empirical phenomenon. So if you are looking at a new crisis, financial crisis, corona crisis, etc., and you think of a new question in the context of this crisis, this could be the unique selling proposition of your paper. So to give you some ideas of what these unique selling propositions look like in research papers, I've compiled a couple of examples. For example, this working paper, well, in 2017 was a working paper by Guo Xu, The Costs of Patronage, Evidence from the British Empire. And in the abstract, it says, I study how patronage affects the promotion and performance of senior bureaucrats within a global organization, the British Empire. I combine newly digitized personnel and public finance data from the colonial administration between 1854 to 1966 to study the inner workings of the bureaucracy of the British Empire, more or less, and then he exploits the ministerial turnover in London as a source of within-governor variation and so on. But the interesting idea here is that obviously it's about data that has only been recently digitized, and it's actually quite ancient. So this is the fancy data that is now being used for the very first time to study a research question in economics. So that's the unique selling proposition of this paper, and actually we are done. A second example is a research paper by Bartram, Brown and Conrad in the Journal of Financial and Quantitative Analysis in 2011. It's the effect of derivatives on firm risk and value. This is actually kind of a new research method, at least in combination with this topic, at least in this context here of risk management. What is the problem? The problem is that in corporate finance, we study risk, obviously. And let's say that we proxy risk by using the volatility of the stock return. Now, we want to see, is it sensible to do risk management? Does risk management have an impact on risk? And if yes, is it positive? Is it negative? So it could be that we want to study the effect of risk management. This is our X on our volatility of the stock return, or another proxy of risk, which is our Y in a regression analysis. The problem is obviously that risk will also influence risk management. Why? We have high risk. That means we will do more risk management. And if we do risk management, ideally we would hope for risk to go down. So this means the whole question is highly endogenous. We'll be talking a lot about endogeneity in this class, but obviously here it's reverse causality. The causality doesn't only run from risk management to risk, but it also runs from risk back again to risk management. This is what we call reverse causality. So you need a clever methodology to study this effect of risk management on risk. So what they do is, using a large sample of non-financial firms from 47 countries, we examine the effect of derivative use. That is basically risk management. If you use derivatives, you are implementing risk management. On firm risk and value, we control for endogeneity. This is important. By matching users and non-users on the basis of their propensity to use derivatives. And we also use a new technique to estimate the effect of emitted variable bias on our invariances. So what does this mean? First of all, let's talk 1 second about non-financial firms. In empirical research, you very often differentiate between studies that only look at financial firms and studies that look at non-financial firms. Why is that? Well, financial firms, let's go FF, they are regulated, highly regulated actually, and industrial firms, they are not regulated, most of them at least. So you have to make a clear distinction between financial and non-financial firms, and because you have more non-financial firms than financial firms, it does make sense to look at non-financial firms in this study. So that's what they do first. And then you need to make sure that you capture the causal effect of risk management on risk. So what they do is, they take the universe of firms and they distinguish the users and non-users of derivatives, so that is these companies use risk management and these companies do not use risk management. And what they do then is, they have a company A and a company X, they have a company B and a company Y and a company C and a company Z, and then they match A to X, maybe Z to C, and B to Y, and they make sure that they always have one company that uses derivatives and one company that is very similar that does not use derivatives, and they match these users to non-users, and then what they do actually resembles a sort of a difference in differences analysis. We'll see this later on in our class, but what you can think of is this. It looks pretty much like a pharmaceutical study. You have companies that take the medicine and you have companies that take a placebo, and if you see that sigma risk goes down for the users and sigma stays the same for the non-users, and those two groups are comparable, then you can argue that risk management has a reducing effect on risk. This is what they do in their paper. So what is this paper all about? It's actually studying a node question using standard data by using a methodology that is more appropriate and that has not been used before in this context. So another paper, actually also by Bartram, Brown and now Stultz, in the Journal of Finance in 2012, why are US stocks more volatile? What they find is, for the very first time, that for some reason the stocks of US companies, even if the companies are similar to companies in the European Union, for example, the US companies still have a higher stock volatility. And why is that? They argue that actually a firm's stock return volatility can be higher for good reasons. So it's good volatility, it's more growth opportunities, it's more innovation, the companies are more dynamic, and this is what they term as good volatility. So it's a completely new question and actually a new empirical phenomenon also. So that's their paper. A pretty good example for a new empirical phenomenon is this paper, very famous Shadow Insurance by Ralph Cohen and Motohiro Yogo in Econometrica. Econometrica is one of the top 5 journals in economics, actually not finance, but nevertheless, it's even a better journal than in finance. And what they say in their abstract is life insurers use reinsurance to move liabilities from regulated and rated companies that sell policies to shadow reinsurers, which are less regulated and unrated off-balance sheet entities within the same insurance group. This paper, for the very first time, identified this potential problem in the US insurance industry, that some insurers move liabilities from their balance sheet to companies, subsidiaries that are not regulated or less regulated. And this problem is similar to shadow banking during the financial crisis. And because these life insurers are also connected to banks, they argue in this paper in 2016 that this behavior that was previously unidentified and not known in the empirical research literature, that this phenomenon could pose a systemic threat to the financial sector. So this is a new empirical phenomenon. The analysis itself is pretty easy to understand actually, and it's not too complicated. Okay, and last but not least, also a new empirical phenomenon, commonality in liquidity, 20-year-old paper by Choudhia, Roll and Subramaniam in the Journal of Financial Economics. The abstract says, traditionally and understandably, the microscope of market microstructure, so the field that studies the working and the way financial markets function, how prices evolve. Market microstructure has focused on attributes of single assets. Little theoretical attention and virtually no empirical work has been devoted to common determinants of liquidity, nor to their empirical manifestation, correlated movements in liquidity. This is what they study. They show for the very first time that there is correlation in the movements of liquidity. Liquidity and market liquidity move in parallel. And this correlation between liquidity and market liquidity, this is what is shown in this paper 20 years ago for the very first time. So these papers all have different unique selling propositions, and you need to think about what your paper, your thesis, could have when it comes to a unique selling proposition. So in the next video, we'll tackle research questions.